Hello, Year 11, and welcome to our next history lesson. I hope you had a good vocational week last week. I'm excited to get through more of our history content. Now we're back into our normal timetable. So we're going to pick up where we left off the first week of remote learning, and we're going to look at the growth and appeal of the Nazi Party. But before we do that, please could you pause the video, click on the low stakes quiz link and complete this for me. So this is your knowledge organizer words. That's going to be your low stakes quizzes from now on. Okay, so complete those, submit and check your answers. And then once you've done that, if you come back to me and we will carry on with the rest of today's lesson. Okay, well done, Year 11. So these were the words you were given, and just in case you did miss any of your correct answers, here are the correct answers for you. Now remember, we've got a mixture of all of the topics words in this unit because we've now finished the Cold War, so we're now revising all of our topics. So in your books, can you please put today's date and your title, which is the growth of the Nazi Party. Please make sure your date and title are beautiful and neat, and you underline it with a ruler for me. If you need to pause the video to continue writing your title, please do, and just press play when you're ready. Okay, so we're looking first of all at the growth of the Nazi Party. And by 1928, Hitler and the Nazis were very well known. Okay, so they were really well known, but they were still only the 8th most popular political party in Germany. They received only 800,000 votes in elections, with less than 3% of the population actually voting for them. In 1928, few Germans would have predicted that Hitler could ever become the leader of Germany. Yet, by July 1932, the Nazis were the most popular party, recording nearly 14 million votes. And we're going to look today at how that happened. So the first thing I would like you to do in your books, you will need to create this table, please. But like we do usually when we do a table, I would suggest that you don't necessarily do every row. You maybe do the depression, write your points, then underline to then go on to unhappy with the Weimar government, so that then you don't have to try and squeeze lots of information into a tiny little space. Okay, pause the video to draw out that first section, and then we will carry on with the information. Okay, so the first factor is the Depression. And as you can see here, the Depression hit Germany hard. Businesses collapsed, unemployment soared, and banks closed. Now, all of this actually helped Hitler. Because all of this was prosperous until the Depression hit, people didn't see the need to vote for him. So they paid little attention to him in the 1920s. However, the Depression hits and they've become, They no longer trust the government, should we say, and so they actually start to listen to Hitler. Hitler never changes his core beliefs. He never changes what he's saying. So he continued to repeat the core beliefs, and this was that the Treaty of Versailles was a crime against Germany, that Jews should be blamed for the economic problems, and that Germany should be reborn as a great and powerful country. These three things were pretty much Hitler's foreign policy right from the start, and he never changes this. So their message still stays the same as it was in the early 1920s, except now desperate Germans wanted to believe them, and so, in turn, they voted for him. So you've also got a couple of sources there that can help you. What I would like you to do in that first row where it says Factor 1, the Depression, I want you to write 3 to 4 key bullet points in what made the Depression a reason for voting for the Nazis, or helped the Nazi policy grow. Nazi party grow, sorry. What you will need to do is pause the video so that you can see the screen, and then once you are done, press play and we can move on. Okay, so to give you an idea, these are kind of 3 key points that I came up with. So, the Depression hit Germany hard, businesses collapsed and banks closed. So because of this, voters now started to listen to Hitler, and the Nazis were repeating their core beliefs, and desperate Germans were now willing to listen to them. Okay, so that's what we're going to do all the way through. That's the only time I'm going to show you an example. The others you need to do yourself, please. So our next factor is Germans were unhappy with the Weimar government. So the Weimar politicians couldn't seem to agree how to help the unemployed and get Germany out of the Depression. Now remember, the Weimar government is going to have a variety of beliefs in it. So you might still get that argument with how things should be handled. They argued constantly and achieved very little. First, one chancellor and then another made little impact. So the problem is we've got all of these chancellors that are supposed to be improving the country, and they're just not. They're not making the impact. We've had Gustav Stresemann that seemed to do wonderful things for the country, but we hit the Depression and we don't have clear leaders like that. One chancellor, Brüning, was passing laws by using the president's emergency decrees and making them legal under Article 48. So this is quite a drastic move to do. This is quite worrying that he'd start using Article 48 when he's not even the president. However, when Brüning, the chancellor, tried to pass laws to seize rich people's land and give it to poor peasants, the new President Hindenburg quickly drew his support for Brüning so that he couldn't pass that law particularly, and so Brüning actually had to resign. Now, that's very communisty to do that. To give land from the rich to the poor is kind of going down that socialist, communist route, okay? And at the moment, the Weimar government is supposed to be democratic. For many ordinary Germans then, the democratic system of Weimar Germany was just not working anymore. Some people who had always tried hard to support the key principles of democracy were drawn towards political parties, both the left and the right wing, with more extremist ideas about how to run the country. So what we're seeing is, even these people that were staunch democrats that wanted democracy in the country, because the Weimar government was failing so much, they were still going to extremist parties. So pause the video and write down 3 or 4 points about Germans being unhappy with the Weimar government. Okay, then we're going to look at our next one. It's the appeal of Adolf Hitler himself. So, Hitler himself actually had a lot to do with his increasing popularity. Okay, so it was actually the person that was popular. So Hitler was really charismatic. We've talked about this before, and we've talked about how people wanted to listen to him speak. People were drawn to him. You know, people have said that he was a nice man when you met him. And so he had this charismatic personality that people were drawn to and wanted to be part of. And so because of that, he could make people believe that he could be trusted. And if people trust him, then that also means they're going to support him. What we've also, we've looked at clips before, we've talked about it. Hitler was a powerful and inspiring speaker, okay? He had great oratory skills. And so because of this, because he spoke with such passion and drive, an inspiration, he was able to fill his audiences with hope as well. They listened to him and believed what he was saying. So if you pause the video there and pop in some information about the appeal of Hitler into your table as well, please. Okay, and then we've got the fear of communism. So remember, in the 1920s and 30s, we get this Red Scare, okay? And then we see this again in the 1950s and 60s with the Cold War. So the Red Scare, the first time, comes around in the 1920s. So in 1917, there'd been a communist revolution in Russia. This influenced the communist Germans in Germany. And so they tried to take over Germany after the First World War. Now, because they try, obviously they don't succeed, but they do try, this kind of freaks out and worries the middle and upper class Germans, because they're the businessmen, they're the rich people, they're the landowners. So they are not going to like communism. They're not going to be supporters of it, because communism is everybody's equal and everybody has the same amount of land. So they didn't want to lose the wealth and position in society that they'd managed to build up. Communists also don't believe in religious institutions. They're not very religious. So that worries your Catholics and your Protestants at the time as well. They don't want communism to take over because they want their religions to keep going. Hitler sent his own private army, the SA, to fight with communist gangs. Now, if Hitler is sending his private army to fight communism, and he says, as one of his key core beliefs, we're going to fight communism and end communism, this is going to get people's support. People are going to like this idea. They are going to vote for Hitler. So Hitler gained support from the German middle and upper classes and the religious entities, the religious people, because he promised to deal with the communist threat. Okay, so pause the video once more so that you can pop in some information about the fear of communism. Okay, and then the last one that we've got is Factor 5, the Nazi Party structures, methods, and tactics. So, Hitler thought he could become Germany's ruler by leading armed soldiers in a revolution. So we've talked about the Munich Putsch before, and we know this happened, but we also know that he spectacularly fails in taking over Munich, and he ends up in prison and so on. And it was after this event that he realised that he needed to change his tactic. He wasn't necessarily going to get the support that he needed. So he decides to get power legally by winning votes in elections. And if you could see me now, legally would be in air quotes, because whilst he does do it through votes, how he obtains those votes isn't always in the fairest way. Okay, so Hitler and the Nazis started to spread their ideas systematically to build up support. And they did this through an effective combination of persuasion and intimidation. Okay, so, and let's just say that persuasion was quite heavy persuasion. They never let up. Okay, so a lot of people just go, yeah, okay, I'll vote for them. So that persuasion would stop. Some people, they frightened into voting for them. We've talked about the March election before in 1933 and how they had brown shirts stationed around polling booths. So people only voted for the Nazis. So it was this kind of intimidation. So some of the ways they did it. The Nazi Party offices were set up all over Germany to recruit more loyal followers. There were 100,000 men in the SA by 1931, growing to 400,000 by 1932. So the SA were his bodyguards that protected him at meetings and influenced the voters. The Nazi Party made use of propaganda. So remember Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda? He was very, very good at his job. So he used media. like radios and cinemas. Do you remember we talked about the fact that every German household had a radio so that they could hear Hitler's speeches and so on? They bought newspapers and printed millions of leaflets. And they distributed these everywhere to allow as many people as possible to see the message. Hitler himself took part in parades to show off the Nazi power, and he held regular rallies where he could make his speeches. And then, of course, he set up the Hitler Youth, which we're going to have a look at in a few lessons' time. But he set up the Hitler Youth to encourage younger followers. It's almost like that. If you remember, we call it indoctrination. So if you get them young and brainwash them, they'll grow up supporting Hitler. And then the Depression hit, and Hitler was able to use this to his advantage. So the Nazis appeared the most organised and disciplined group in the country. And they gave the impression that the party might restore the nation's greatness. So again, he was able to use this to his advantage to get those more votes that he needed. So pause the video so that you can pop some of that information into your table for me. And then when you've got your points, you can come back to the video and we'll carry on with the lesson. Okay, so now that you've completed your table, it should look something like this. So I have completed one. If there's a couple of points there that you think should be put in, please put them in, and then we'll move on to the next task. Okay, the next thing I'd like you to do, in your books, can you write this question, please? Which factor was the most significant reason for the growth of the Nazi Party? Explain your answer. So I want you to write down which one you think was the most important and why. Once you've done that, come back to the video and we will carry on with the lesson. Okay, brilliant. So now we're going to have a look at who voted for the Nazis. Okay, so we've looked at their appeal, we've looked at their growth. So now that he's appealed to the people, we're going to have a look at who actually voted for him. So in your books, I don't mind if you do this as a mind map or a bullet pointed list. It's up to you. As we watch the video, you need to make notes of who it was that voted for the Nazis, please.
In 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland and set the stage for 6 years of total war throughout large parts of the world, kickstarting the Second World War. Germany went from a defeated nation in 1918 to the master of most of Europe in the 1940s, with a fascist dictator in power. But how did this happen? Who voted for the Nazis? In this video, I'm going to look at who voted the Nazis and Adolf Hitler into power in the fateful election of 1933, and build up a profile of what a Nazi voter looked like. Where did they come from? How old were they? Were they male or female? And how did they make their living? Were they all from a particular class, and did they all follow the same religion? Now, several things are striking when looking at a map of Nazi party votes from 1933. The North, for the most part, is more pro-Nazi than the South, with the notable exception of the Western Rhineland and some of the central southern regions. The northwestern areas in particular show very large support for the Nazi Party. Perhaps it's no coincidence that these very pro-Nazi areas belong to the old Prussian Empire, which under Bismarck united the other German states into the first unified German Reich after defeating both the French and the Austrians. Another striking thing about the distinction of Nazi voters is the distinction between rural and urban areas. Urban areas stick out like sore thumbs even when surrounded by pro-Nazi regions. Cities like Hamburg, Berlin, Potsdam, Düsseldorf, Cologne, Dresden, and München all have far weaker support for the Nazis, even when they are surrounded by very pro-Nazi regions in the north, like in Berlin, Hamburg, and Potsdam. This is perhaps very unsurprising because early Nazi propaganda was very much focused on urban voters, as can be seen in their election posters from the late 1920s. However, the Nazis found the most sympathy in the countryside, in small farming communities among the peasants and agrarian workers. Nazi support in large cities was a tenth below the popularity of other parties, and 50% of first-time voters in the half-decade from 1925 to 1930 lived in towns of under 5,000 inhabitants. City-dwelling industrial workers often preferred to vote for the Communists or the Social Democrats, and the cultural shift of the mid-1920s and the liberal ideas developed in urban centers such as Berlin, Bremen, and Hamburg also made people less inclined to put a cross in Hitler's ballot box. A possible explanation for the North-South divide in terms of Nazi voters is the religious divide that had prevailed since the Reformation and later conflicts between Catholics in the South and Protestants in the North. In general, Catholics preferred to vote for their special interest parties rather than the more nationalistic parties like the DNVP and NSDAP. However, many of the Nazis' propaganda concerning the role of the traditional family and traditional family values rang true to many, so it was not a foregone conclusion that there was no support in Catholic areas. The Nazis had twice as much support in votes in majority Protestant areas due to the success of Zentrum and the regional BVP, or Bavarische Volkspartei, in the Catholic South. The widespread nature of Nazi support is much more evident when looking at the occupations of Nazi Party members. The working class, though making up the largest fraction of membership, was underrepresented in the larger German population, which was closer to being half of what's shown here. The Mittelstand, which is the German middle class, and other self-employed white-collar workers were notoriously anti-Weimar and distrusted the voting system, though they shared roughly equal representation in the Nazi Party and were overrepresented in comparison to their role in the larger German population. Nazi was initially a slang term and shortening for nationalist socialist, which attracted the working classes with both their socialist and nationalist promises. Small farmers and peasants had fared poorly under Weimar, which imported foreign grain and agitated agrarian communities, so many of these, usually traditionalist, Protestant, and northern voters, chose to support the Nazis. The German middle classes found hope in Hitler's nationalist rhetoric and may have hoped for a return to the authoritarianism in which they had prospered during the Second Reich under the Kaiser. Many young people were attracted to the Nazi Party as they made up large parts of the manual workforce. They might also have chosen for the Communists, but those who did not saw the Nazi Party as the alternative to them. The presence and discipline of the Sturmabteilung, or SA, also gave many youngsters hope, as well as fear if they were planning to vote for the Communists, so some of them might have been put up and might have voted for the Nazis instead. That Hitler's Germany would be resolute and a strong nation that would not suffer from the chaos and the coups that had marred the early days of Weimar. The Nazi Party also garnered support from the elderly. Veterans especially could relate to Hitler and the SA, who were initially made up of old soldiers and veterans and Freikorps members, but also non-military, retired elderly people who had not voted before saw the Nazis as upholders of traditional values. Although the cities began to see a large increase in the amount of women working in offices, publishers, and the government, in rural areas men remained by far the largest workforce, and so they were more likely to vote for the Nazi Party, at least in its early days. The SA also attracted men to join it and vote for the party. Women were, however, a force to be reckoned with within the party. They were less likely to vote for far-left parties like the KPD, as they made up almost none of the manual labor force that the communists pandered to, instead choosing to vote for religious parties depending on their beliefs. In 1932, 6.5 million women voted for the Nazi Party. In summary, the Protestant North was more likely to vote Nazi than the Catholic South and West. Rural workers were more likely to vote for them, in contrast to urban ones who often chose KPD or SPD. Though not specifically favored by a specific group, the Nazis had much support from the working and middle classes. Nazi voters tended to either be young men or the elderly, bringing the average to a mean of 32 years of age. The amount and importance of women also changed over time, starting off fairly minimal until in 1932, female Nazi voters outnumbered their male counterparts. Given this information, a generic average Nazi voter from 1932 would be a rural, Protestant area in the north of the country, a working or middle-class man or woman around the age of 32. The Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party also had a very wide base of support throughout Germany's geographical, religious, occupational, gender, and class divisions. The support of certain groups changed as time went on, some growing stronger and gaining support in areas and losing it in others. The Nazis' response to this was what made them a successful, electable party for millions of Germans in 1933, changing their tactics when their popularity fell within certain demographics of the populace. This wide base of support made the Nazi Party what Hitler called a Volkspartei, a people's party, and could be seen by the Führer and by many of its voters as a national party of and for Germany. All right, everyone, thank you very much for watching. This has been my video about who voted for the Nazis and a little bit about why. Now I will link on the screen here some more videos about Weimar. I've made a playlist here if you have found this interesting, and in future I'll make some more videos about the Nazis and about this period in...
Okay.
In 1939...
Oh, there we go. So, lots of information there about who voted for him as well. So, what I would like you to do now, so this is our last task of the lesson, you are going to complete an exam question. So we've seen these before. We know this is the last question you get in your Germany paper, and it is worth 12 marks. So what I have done for you, I've put sentence starters on there to help you. So all you'll need to do is download the document attached in your assignment on Google Classrooms. You can submit it one of three ways. You could print off the document, write your answer on there, and then send me a picture. And then I will collect in the hard copy when we're back in school. You can download the document, type your answer, and email me that document. Or you can create your own copy of the document, type your answer, and then upload it to Google Classrooms where I can get a copy there as well. You can do either one of those three. I don't mind which one you choose to do, but you do need to send me this final task, please. Okay? So once you have completed your exam question and you've sent it to me, you can close down the video because that is us done for today's lesson. And I am looking forward to speaking to you next lesson, where we are learning about, let me just double check, how Hitler became Chancellor. Take care of yourselves until then, and if you need anything, you can always email me at any point for help, okay?